I can imagine that the pair of you, because you're both very creative, I can imagine, Ray, music playing an important part of your life as a young lad, and maybe writing and reading for you, Ed. Did you play any of those games that people will have memories of, like what was Kirby for me, where it didn't take a lot of brain power, you just stood in the middle of the road. I mean, parents would just have can you imagine now, have kittens at the idea of, well, take your ball and go and play in the road and just chuck it against the curb for half an hour. But that's what we did. We played Kirby and hide and seek and all the rest of it. Were there any games that you remember playing as kids?
Not so much games as such. We just went all trolling about on our bikes. Went all over the place on our bikes. I mean, at the time, it was quite easy. I lived very close to the beach. We were always down on the beach and hanging around the rocks.
How old were you when you were allowed to go out on your own for the first time?
Oh, I was always allowed out on my own. It was safe then. You could do it only when it came in when it was dark. That's what you did. I don't think it's that much different now, to be honest. I think people are paranoid. That's one of the sad things about kids these days. They don't get a chance to get out much. Yeah, you learn about life in the back lane, don't you? That's where I certainly did.
I think a lot of it had to do with the darkness as well. You'd have to be in before the dark hours as well.
That's right.
But we played football, that's all we did. So every variation of football, we played every game. But we also played Monte Kitty, kick the can.
What was Monte Kitty?
I can't even. I don't think it had rules because somebody stood against the post, and then you bent over and you had to jump on it, and it was.
Oh, you remember it, don't you?
It was quite dangerous. And I remember a few broken noses playing British Bulldog. That often happens. Can you remember that, British Bulldog?
Yeah. Where are you from?
Well, originally Low Fell. Now I live in Throckley.
So Throckley, but Low Fell originally. Okay, because I'm wondering if Monte Kitty had a.
But look, I think it was different names in different areas.
It was Monte Kitty at the coast.
Ah, right.
Same game.
I remember so when Ray's saying there about cycling, I remember getting a second-hand bike. I don't know where we got it from, but we got it, and a mate and I, we cycled to the airport. And that was the airport now. I mean, obviously if you go to the airport now, there's all the housing and Kingston Park and all that. But this place was miles out in the country. And the chain kept coming off. It took us hours to get there. We were scruffy when we got there.
One bike between you?
On a bike. Well, literally, one worked. But that was it was the sense of proportion as well when you were a kid, because you didn't have the massive, I'm starting to sound like my father now, but you didn't have the massive housing estates that you have now. And just everywhere seemed to be open spaces, and you'd go fishing in the little streams and the burns and things. So yeah, it was you just roamed, didn't you?
You just reminded me actually when you talked about building. I remember they were building a place around the back of us. One of the fields we used to play on, they started building an estate on it. And it's not like now, if there's a building site, there's big fences and security guards and everything. It was just completely open.
It was your playground.
When the builders went home, that was when we went to play there. Weekends, we used to, build igloos with the bricks and get some bits of, what do you call it, corrugated iron, make a roof, and just take our sandwiches, spend all day there,
Right, one thing I must ask you both, because I'm intrigued as to whether you've both sort of always worked in the line of work in which you work. First jobs, you mentioned what your parents did or what your dads did. What was your first job, Ray?
Only proper job I've ever had. After I left art college, I was still heavily involved in the music and convinced that that's what I really wanted to do, but I couldn't make any money at it then, so I got a job as a window dresser at Shepherds of Gateshead.
Shepherds of Gateshead.
That's the one.
Can you sing that song?
No. Can anybody remember the Shepherds of Gateshead advert?
My nephew came over from Germany. He was born in England, but he's lived out in Germany. And he came over singing the Shepherds of Gateshead song. And we were singing it on the bus. And somebody says, no, that's not the right words. And they started singing on the bus. I just thought it was funny.
That's the one, yeah. What was it called? The Panorama.
Panorama Cafe.
Panorama Cafe. That's what it was
so
called.
You were a window dresser. Mm-hmm. What did that entail?
Dressing windows.
Just doing fancy stuff in the windows, making them look nice. What a great job.
I used to call myself, I did, that's what I had to do, but the rest of the stuff, they had they built an extra 3 floors on the top. They didn't know what to do with them, so they used to have exhibitions on the top. So I used to do that, build the stands and all that sort of carry on. And then build stuff for Christmas as well, that was great. Building fairy tale castles and little automated stuff fitting out and Christmas.
What a great
But the best thing about it was, because it was long before the days of pagers and telephones and that sort of stuff, mobile telephones, and it was a huge place, that nobody ever knew where I was. So if I had to get away early for a gig, I'd be off. And if I came in late, if I'd been playing somewhere, Carlisle or somewhere, and I was late the next morning, I could come in late. As long as, and my boss was great, as long as the work got done, he knew what I was doing, but he never said it. So it worked out to my advantage.
That is a nice, proper job,
Proper
isn't
job.
it?
Yeah.
Have you ever had a proper job?
Well,
You've had a few, haven't you?
Actually, when I left, I've been freelance now for about 30 odd years. But I did have summer jobs, and I worked at Gosford swimming pool, and that was a great job. Great job. You'd get there for 7:30 and you'd go for a swim and clean the pool out and things. And it was quite amazing. You know, you'd bump into people in the pub afterwards and they'd say, hello. And you'd say, well, I don't recognise you with your clothes on, you know. I see you in the pool, you know. But it was great. Yeah, I worked there. And then I worked in again, this was a summer job. I worked over in Berkeley in a concrete, and I had a little truck, and I used to have to lift aggregates and things like that. And if it spilled over, I used to have to do it manually. And it was a hard job, mind. It was a hard job.
And what was the pay like? Can you remember what the pay was?
In terms of beer, it was 25 pence a pint for beer. And when I was at the bat, I think I was getting about 150 pints for it.
150 pints, that sounds like quite a salary, doesn't it?
Incredible.
And speaking of pints and beer and what you did with your money and your social life, for you, Ray, I suppose your social life has always been wrapped up in the music, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, there were so many places for bands to play in those days, and there were so many bands around. I mean, in the 60s, it was ridiculous. Well, to first answer the question, yes, I was at gigs all the time. If I wasn't playing myself, I was going to see other bands. I were either local bands or big names when they came here. But I mean, there used to be a place, it's called The Lounge now, opposite the Central Station. It's a posh bar. On that corner, there used to be a sort of a barbecue chicken shop. I can't remember what it was called. Take and Eat, that's what it's called, Take and Eat. A barbecue chicken. And on a Saturday night at about 1 o'clock in the morning, there'd be about 14 or 15 group vans parked outside there, getting somebody to eat on the way home.
And that was the only place then, was it?
Is that or Bowers? You could go into Bowers, but you had to sit down there. That was a bit for, that's Gotham City now it's called. That was a big all-night cafe. Or there was Smoky Joe's around the back, which was the real women's canteen. You could go around there sometimes. But, you know, there was that many bands around, all playing. So it was a big social life.
So what kind of bands did you go and see? What kind of names that we might recognise?
The local bands.
Or international bands?
Well, the local bands, the best local band then, and still is now, was the Jungle Partners. To go and see them all over the place. And then there was bands like The Sect and the Gas Board, which Brian Ferry was in. And lots of them, loads of them. Ben Ali's Whiskey Run had great names. Loads of them. The Chosen Few.
Remember any of those bands? Anyone else seen them?
Yeah, Jungle Partners, they were great. Still are. Go and see them, they're still great. Well, there you go, see?
Isn't it great? They're still
They were fantastic. And then, in terms of national bands, you could get everything from the sort of quite sort of left field stuff, you know, the blues band, John Mayall and people like that, and Zoot Money and all that. You'd see all those sort of people at the Club of Go-Go. And the chart acts, you'd see either at the Majestic or the City Hall or the Mayfair.
And what was your favourite venue then?
The Club of Go-Go by far.
And what was so good about it?
Everything.
Some nods of recognition.
Everything.
You remember the good times you had at the Club of Go-Go?
It was fantastic because it was, first of all, it was slightly scary. It had two rooms. It had a room called the Young Set and a room called the Jazz Lounge. And the theory was you could only go into the Jazz Lounge if you're over 18. And the only way that they just to look at you, really, if they thought you were 18, you would get this special mark on your hand, which just showed up under a light, and you could go in. But as soon as you got in, of course, everybody was rubbing their hands together so that all the young people could get in. And if you were a band, the support band would play first in the Jazz Lounge, then take all the kit to bits and go through the other room, set it all up again, and play in the Young Set, and the main band would do the opposite. So you used to get this farce at about 10 o'clock with two bands trying to carry all their gear in different directions along a corridor about this big, and setting it all up. But I saw everybody there. Every you know, I saw Pink Floyd there. I saw Eric Clapton there. So I remember sitting talking to Eric Clapton one night when he was about to form a band called Cream. He was telling me all about it, how exciting it was going to be.
And were these guys who were heroes to you, or
oh, yeah.
were they getting recognition about the same time as you anyway?
No, they were 3 or 4 years ahead of us. We were still aspiring to be like, they were our heroes, and we were, but there's no, It's what we wanted to do. I mean, ever since there was a history of that in Newcastle, because, you know, two of the Shadows, Hank Marvin and Bruce Welch, were from Newcastle. And when I used to go to school up just in Cuthbert's, I used to go to the bus up Stanhope Street, and one of the bus stops was right outside where Brian Rankin, Hank Marvin told most of us, where Brian Rankin used to live. And that was a huge inspiration. It was like, you know, we thought, well, if he can do it, maybe we can do it. So we always had this confidence that one day it would be our turn, and but seeing, so every band you saw was a revelation, because it was just, you learnt every time you saw somebody.
Was this something you were party to, or were you spending all of your hard-earned cash in the pub on pints, or were you in the music scene?
I mean, music, I have to put this absolutely straight. If I could give, I mean, we've been to places like Dublin, and, you know, 1,300 people have given the place standing ovations, the Theatre Royal, and New Zealand and places like that. But I would change, if I had one day to be a rock and roll star, I would give that up, honestly, one day. I did actually share a stage with Ray back in 1977. He didn't know me, but I was only a few yards away, because I went to see Lindisfarne in concert, and you couldn't get a ticket for love nor money, but then you introduced tickets on the side, didn't you? Or the seats on the side.
City Hall around the back of the stage, yeah.
And so I've been on stage with Lindisfarne. That's the nearest I've got to rock and roll. That's the nearest I've got. But I think all the points Ray was making there were valid, because that was the 1960s, and I think that was a great time of youthful exuberance, and rock and roll was coming into its full. The most important art form. I mean, I cover the ballet, and I cover opera, and I love those, and I do theatre for all the newspapers in the region. But for me, rock and roll's the greatest art form by miles. It's just, everything about it's fantastic. But the point is, Ray was saying about the 1960s, and there's so many places. Come the early 1970s, it was dead. The music scene was pretty much dead, you know, by about 73, 74. And the generation that I belonged to was the punk rock generation. And that was just incredible, absolutely incredible. I mean, The Clash for me are the greatest band, you know, and they were my band. They spoke to me about what the words were, and the music, the energy. So, yeah, sorry, Julia, rock and roll. And I still go and see rock music today, and I review it. And we've got a band in the North East called Maximo Park, who are absolutely wonderful. But I have to get back to the point that the reason Lindisfarne still have a resonance in the region today is because they sunk roots deeply in the region. Even my parents, who are 80, still sing Lindisfarne songs. And that's a testament to the brilliance of the songs of Lindisfarne. The other thing was, as well, about Lindisfarne, is that they lived in the area. You could walk into a pub and there'd be Ray Laidlaw, there'd be Alan Hull, or, you know, and they were our people. They were just ordinary like us, but they were rock stars. And you, as you say, you know, no matter what discipline of the arts you were involved in, they were an inspiration, because they were our people. They were just like us, brought up on the same streets. And it literally is, if you feel, well, if they can do it, you know, we're going to give it a go.
I think there was an expectation, and I don't know if that still exists today, and maybe there are people here today who have a view on this, or maybe your kids or grandkids have experienced this, where if you really want to make it, then you have to leave, that you can't really make it here. Now, both of you have chosen to stay in the North East. There are a lot of famous Northeasterners and famous Geordies who spout about the North East when they have a mind to, but they come back very rarely. But you're very much of the North East. Did you ever feel that pressure that you had to move away in order to get where you wanted to be professionally?
We had to. Originally we did. We moved to London, and I lived there for about 3 years. But I was never there for very long without nipping back home. You know, but that was, we had to do it because the record
nipping back home.
Yeah. Well, we lived as far north of London as we could, so we're right next to the A1. So, but I loved living in London. It was great. I really had a great time down there. But I like here better. Simple as that. I love travelling. I love going to lots of places. I love having a local pub in cities all over the place. I think that's a really interesting thing to do. I like travelling. I'm not, you know, I'm not that insular, but I just think this is a fantastic place to live. And when I had choice, where it didn't matter where I lived, and I could still do what I wanted to do for a living, well, I came back here straight away.
So it hasn't held you back? You didn't feel like it was holding you back?
No, not in the slightest.